I thought my degree was a ticket to the boardroom, but 72 hours after graduation, I opened a desk drawer and found my future had been signed over to my sister. When I confronted them, Mom looked me in the eye and said I was just a tool designed to be phased out. They did not realize that the person they were discarding was the only one keeping their biggest client from walking away. My name is Avery Alexander, and for the last 4 years, I have lived my life in two distinct timelines. In one timeline, I was a university student, drowning in case studies about supply chain optimization and lean manufacturing, surviving on vending machine coffee, and the desperate hope that a piece of paper would finally prove my worth. In the second timeline, I was the ghost in the machine of Ridgeway Industrial Works, the person answering emails at 2 a.m, smoothing over shipping delays, and translating my father's chaotic directives into actionable orders for the floor staff. I believed that these two timelines were destined to converge the moment I walked across the stage in my cap and gown. I thought the diploma was a receipt for payment rendered. I thought it was the key that would unlock the door to the executive office, allowing me to finally sit at the table not as a daughter, not as a helper, but as a partner. I was wrong. The reality of my return to the family business was not a coronation. It was barely a ripple. 3 days after graduation, I walked through the heavy steel doors of the main production floor. The air inside Ridgeway always smelled the same, a thick, metallic tang of coolant, hydraulic fluid, and hot steel. It was a scent that most people found suffocating, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like my childhood. I had learned to walk on this concrete. I had learned to count by tallying inventory boxes of precision screws. I walked past the rows of CNC machines, their rhythmic hum a comforting heartbeat that I could feel in the soles of my boots. I nodded to Miller, our shift foreman, who gave me a quick salute with a grease-stained hand before turning back to a lathe. There was no banner. There was no cake in the break room. There was no meeting scheduled to announce my new role. Instead, when I reached the small, glass-walled office I had occupied for years, a space barely larger than a supply closet, I found my desk buried under a mountain of invoices and shipping manifests that had accumulated while I was taking my final exams. My father, Gordon Alexander, walked past my door 10 minutes later. He did not stop to congratulate me. He did not ask to see the degree. He simply tapped the glass with his knuckles and pointed at the stack of papers. "We are behind on the creeping gear inventory for the sprawling logistics contract," he said through the glass, his voice muffled. "I need those reconciled by noon." I swallowed the lump of disappointment forming in my throat and told myself to be patient. That was the Alexander way. Or at least, that was the Avery Alexander way. Keep your head down. Do the work. The recognition will come when the job is done. So I sat down, booted up my computer, and went to work. I cleared the backlog in 4 hours, a task that would have taken anyone else 2 days, because I knew the inventory codes by heart. I knew that the system sometimes lagged on the intake reports, and I knew exactly which vendor usually forgot to scan the packing slips. But as the days turned into a week, and the week bled into 2 weeks, a subtle, chilling pattern began to emerge. It was not what was happening to me that caused the unease. It was what was happening around me. It was the silence where my name used to be. It started with the emails. I had always been the primary point of contact for our mid-level suppliers. It was my name on the purchase orders, my phone number on the emergency contact list. But as I scrolled through the chains to catch up on a material delay, I noticed a new name CC'd on every correspondence: Reagan Alexander, my younger sister. Reagan did not know the difference between a lathe and a mill. She did not know that high-carbon steel behaves differently in the winter than it does in the summer. Reagan knew lighting, she knew angles, she knew how to walk through the factory floor without getting a single speck of dust on her white blazer. She had spent the last 2 years floating through a communications degree and curating her social media presence. Yet here she was, copied on technical emails about tensile strength specifications. I tried to brush it off. Maybe Dad wanted her to learn the ropes. It made sense to expose her to the business, even if she had never shown an interest in the dirty, grinding reality of what we actually did. but then came the marketing blast. I was eating a sandwich at my desk, scrolling through LinkedIn, when the official Ridgeway Industrial Works page popped up on my feed. It was a professionally shot photo of the factory floor. The lighting was dramatic, casting heroic shadows across the machinery. And there, standing in the center of the aisle, wearing a hard hat that looked like it had never been touched by human hands, was Reagan. She was pointing at a blueprint, looking decisively at a group of nodding actors who were definitely not our employees. The caption read, "The new generation of precision. Reagan Alexander leads Ridgeway into a future of innovation and excellence." I stared at the screen until the pixels seemed to blur. Leads? Reagan did not lead. Reagan did not even have a key to the back door. I felt a cold prickle of humiliation slide down my spine. I had just spent 4 years studying supply chain mechanics to actually lead this company into the future, and my sister was getting the title in a caption because she looked better in a hard hat. I closed the tab. I told myself it was just PR. It was just smoke and mirrors to attract a younger demographic or spruce up the brand image. Mom loved that sort of thing. Marianne Alexander was obsessed with the aesthetic of success, even if she had no interest in the grit required to achieve it. She wanted Ridgeway to look like a tech startup, not a machine shop. If using Reagan as a model helped the company, I should be supportive. I should be a team player. That was what I told myself as I went back to reconciling spreadsheets that no one else wanted to touch. The atmosphere in the office began to shift. Conversations would stop abruptly when I walked into the break room. When I asked the production scheduler about the timeline for the Halston account, our biggest, most critical client, he looked at his shoes and mumbled that he had already sent the update to the executive office. "Which executive office?" I asked. He hesitated, shifting his weight. "Mr. Alexander?" "And Reagan?" "Reagan." Again. Why was Reagan receiving production schedules for the Halston Dynamics contract? That was a technical account. It required knowledge of tolerances within 1,000th of an inch. It required knowing the history of every part failure we had had in the last 5 years. Reagan thought a tolerance was something you had for bad coffee. I decided I needed to speak to my father. I needed to clarify my position. I had the degree now. I had the experience. It was time to formalize the role I had been auditioning for since I was 16 years old. It was late on a Tuesday, nearly 7 o'clock in the evening. The main shift had gone home, and the factory floor was quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation fans and the occasional clank of metal cooling. The office wing was dim, the only light spilling from my father's doorway. I walked down the hall, rehearsing my speech. I was going to be professional. I was going to outline my value proposition. I was going to ask for the title of operations manager. I stepped into his office. Gordon Alexander was sitting behind his massive oak desk. Rubbing his temples, he looked tired. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper than I remembered. When he looked up and saw me, a flicker of something crossed his face. It looked like guilt, but it vanished so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "Avery," he said, his voice rough. "You are still here. I am just finishing up the quality control reports for the night shift," I said, stepping further into the room. "Dad, do you have a minute?" I wanted to talk about the organizational structure now that I am back full-time. He flinched. It was small, a slight tightening of his jaw. But I saw it. He looked down at the papers on his desk and began shuffling them aimlessly. "Not tonight. Avery," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I have a headache that is splitting my skull. It will only take 5 minutes." I pressed. "I just want to know where I stand. I saw the post about Reagan, and I'm seeing her name on the Halston correspondence." He held up a hand to stop me. "Avery, please, we will discuss it later. Right now, I need a favor." I paused, the wind taken out of my sails. "What do you need?" "I need the insurance renewal documents for the building." He said, "The broker is coming first thing in the morning, and I think I left the current policy in the filing cabinet in the conference room. It is in the bottom drawer. Can you grab it for me while I finish this email?" It was such a mundane request. A fetch quest. After 4 years of university and a decade of loyalty, I was still the girl being sent to fetch papers. but old habits die hard, and the desire to please him, to be the dutiful daughter, was a reflex I could not suppress. "Sure, Dad," I said, "I will get it." I walked out of his office and down the darkened hallway to the conference room. It was a cold, sterile space used mostly for vendor meetings and the occasional audit. The filing cabinet in the corner was an ancient, beige metal beast that had been there since my grandfather founded the company. I knelt down and pulled open the bottom drawer. The metal runners squeaked in the silence. The drawer was packed tight with hanging folders. Tax returns from 5 years ago. Maintenance warranties. Old safety inspection reports. I began flipping through them, looking for the tab labeled Insurance. My fingers brushed past a manila folder that looked newer than the others. The label was crisp, printed on a label maker rather than handwritten in the scrawl of our old secretary. Transition plan. I stopped. My heart gave a strange, singular thump against my ribs. Transition plan. That sounded like exactly what I had wanted to discuss. My father must have been working on it. He must have been drawing up the paperwork for my promotion, planning the future of the company now that I was fully qualified to step up. A wave of relief washed over me. He wasn't ignoring me. He was preparing a surprise. That was why he was so evasive. He wanted to have it all ready before he showed me. I knew I should not open it. It was not the insurance file. It was not what he had asked for. But the pull was irresistible. This was my life. This was the validation I had been starving for. I pulled the folder out. It was thin, only a few pages. I sat back on my heels on the thin commercial carpet, the hum of the factory fans distant and rhythmic in my ears. I opened the cover. The first page was a summary document, dated 2 weeks prior. The header read, Ridgeway Industrial Works, Strategic Restructuring and Succession. My eyes scanned down the page, hungry for my name. I wanted to see Operations Director Avery Alexander. I wanted to see VP of Production Avery Alexander. I found my name, but it was not where I expected it to be. The text was organized into a table. The first column was titled Leadership, Ownership Transfer, Reagan Alexander, Position, Chief Executive Officer. I blinked. I actually blinked hard, as if to reset my vision, thinking I had misread the words. Reagan? CEO? The girl who thought a supply chain was something you wore around your neck? I looked down to the next row. Advisory Board. Gordon Alexander, Marianne Alexander, and then the bottom row. The row that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Current Operations Lead. Avery Alexander. New role. Support staff / knowledge transfer. Status, phase out. 12 to 18-month horizon. The air left the room. It felt as though someone had vacuumed all the oxygen out of the conference room, leaving me gasping in a vacuum. Phase out. The words sat there on the white paper, black and sharp and final. I turned the page, my hands trembling slightly. There was a timeline, a detailed Gantt chart showing the transfer of client relationships from me to Reagan. There were notes in the margins in my mother's handwriting. Make sure Avery introduces Reagan to Halston key contacts before Q3. Ensure Avery documents all proprietary troubleshooting protocols before final separation. Position change to be framed as Avery pursuing independent interests to avoid internal friction. They were not just firing me, they were harvesting me. They were planning to drain me of every ounce of knowledge, every connection, every operational secret I had learned through years of sweat and sleepless nights, and then graft it all onto Reagan. They were going to use me to build her a throne, and then they were going to sweep me into the dustbin. I looked at the date on the bottom of the page. It was signed 3 days before my graduation, while I was walking across the stage, smiling at my parents in the audience, thinking they were proud of me. They had already signed the papers to erase me. They had sat there, clapping, knowing that my diploma was not a ticket to the future, but a grand finale to my utility. I sat there on the floor for a long time. I do not know how many minutes passed. The silence of the factory was no longer comforting. It was predatory. The machines I loved, the systems I had built, the people I had protected, none of it was mine. It never had been. I was just the mechanic keeping the car running until the real driver was ready to take the wheel. Avery? My father's voice called from down the hall. Did you find it? I closed the folder. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, tearing sensation that had nothing to do with injury and everything to do with betrayal. I looked at the closed door of the conference room. I could stand up, walk into his office, and scream. I could throw the folder on his desk and demand an explanation. But then I looked at the phrase again in my mind. Phase out. They thought I was a variable they could control. They thought I was a static element in their equation. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady now, a cold, terrifying calm settling over me. I opened the camera app. I photographed every single page of the document. I made sure the text was clear. I made sure the signatures were visible. I made sure the dates were readable. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I put the transition plan back in the drawer, exactly where I had found it. I found the insurance folder 2 slots behind it. Coming. Dad, I called out. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow, flat, but steady. Just had to dig for it. I stood up and smoothed down my skirt. I walked out of the conference room, carrying the insurance papers. I was walking back into the lion's den, but for the first time in my life. I was not walking in as a sheep. I was walking in as something else entirely. I just didn't know what yet. All I knew was that the Avery Alexander who had walked into this room 5 minutes ago was gone. She had been phased out, and the person who walked out was the only one who knew that the entire empire was built on a foundation that was about to crack. To understand why that piece of paper in the filing cabinet felt like a knife twisting in my gut, you have to understand that Ridgeway Industrial Works was never just a job to me. It was not even a career. It was my nursery, my playground, and eventually, my prison. Most children have memories of playgrounds with wood chips and plastic slides. My earliest memories are of the shop floor, specifically the smell of cutting fluid, that sweet chemical scent that clings to your hair and clothes long after you leave the building. While other kids were learning to ride bicycles, I was learning the difference between a Phillips head and a Torx screwdriver. I was not the boss's daughter in the way people usually imagine. I was not the little princess who came in for ice cream and a pat on the head. I was the extra pair of hands that did not cost anything. When I was 10, I spent my summer vacation sweeping metal shavings, the curly, razor-sharp swarf that comes off the lathes. My father, Gordon, told me it was character building. He said that to lead the floor. You had to know the floor. I believed him. I worshipped the ground he walked on, even if that ground was covered in grease. I thought he was molding me, shaping me like a piece of raw stock into something durable and essential. I did not realize then that he was just using the cheapest labor available. By the time I was 16, I had ceased to be a child and had become a fixture. I stopped seeing the factory as a scary, loud place and started seeing it as a living organism. I understood its rhythms. I knew that the number 4 press always overheated if you ran it at top speed before lunch, and I knew that the loading dock door jammed when it rained. I learned to troubleshoot the logic controllers on the older machines because waiting for an external technician cost money, and Gordon hated spending money on maintenance. There is a specific memory from that year that seared itself into my brain. It was a humid July afternoon, and the air conditioning in the office block had failed. But the heat on the floor was infernal. We were running a rush order for an aerospace client, a job that was already 2 weeks late. Suddenly, the main conveyor on the assembly line seized up. The screech of metal on metal was loud enough to shatter teeth. Silence followed. The heavy, expensive silence of production halting. The floor manager was screaming. The operators were standing around, wiping sweat from their foreheads, looking defeated. My father was in a meeting with bankers, and no one dared to disturb him. I walked over, looked at the jam, and realized a sensor bracket had bent, throwing the alignment off. I did not call for help. I did not panic. I crawled under the belt, lying on the greasy concrete in my school clothes. It took me 20 minutes, a wrench, and a lot of leverage, but I bent it back and reset the sensor. When I crawled out, covered in black sludge from my elbows to my knees, The conveyor hummed back to life. The applause from the guys wasn't polite, it was relieved. Miller, the old foreman who had been there since the 70s, clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder and said that I had the touch. He didn't ask where my father was. He didn't ask for the manager. He looked at me. That was the moment I thought I had earned my place, but when I went to the office to wash up, my mother, Marianne, was there. She had stopped by to drop off lunch for Dad. She took one look at me, my ruined jeans, the grease in my hair, the sweat streaking my face, and she did not look proud. She looked disgusted. "Avery, look at you," she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "You look like a mechanic. Go clean yourself up before a client sees you. It is unseemly." That was Marianne. She did not love Ridgeway. She loved what Ridgeway bought. She loved the house on the hill, the country club membership, the brand new SUVs every 2 years. To her, the factory was a dirty, noisy necessity that existed to fund the perfect family image she curated so carefully. She wanted the result, never the process. She wanted the finished product wrapped in shiny plastic, not the raw material and the grinding noise. And then there was Reagan. Reagan was 2 years younger than me, but she lived in a completely different universe, while I was spending my summers sweating on the line. Reagan was at tennis camp, while I was learning to read blueprints. Reagan was learning how to charm the parents of her friends. She would come to the factory sometimes, usually when she needed money, or when Mom wanted a family photo for the Christmas card. She would walk in, pristine in white sneakers that never seemed to touch the dirt. She would smile at the workers, wave like she was in a parade, and say things like, "Oh wow, it is so loud in here. I do not know how you guys stand it." The men would smile back because she was pretty and bright and smelled like expensive perfume, not hydraulic oil. She was the mascot. I was the engine. She would stay for 15 minutes, just long enough to be seen, and then she would slip away before the grime could settle on her skin. I never resented her for it. Not back then. I thought we just had different roles. I thought I was the heir apparent, the one doing the hard yards. While she was free to be the social butterfly, I told myself that my sacrifice was an investment. I was buying equity with every drop of sweat. That belief carried me through university. I did not choose my major based on what I loved. I chose operations and supply chain management because Ridgeway was broken, and I wanted to fix it. I saw the rot that my father ignored. Gordon Alexander loved to talk about legacy. At Sunday dinners, he would raise a glass of wine and give speeches about how his father built this company from a garage, and how it was our duty to steward it for the next generation. But when he spoke to me directly, there was no talk of vision or future. There was only a list of tasks. "Avery, chase up the invoice for the steel shipment. Avery, drive out to the warehouse and count the pallets. Avery, deal with the safety inspector." He never asked me what I thought. He never asked for my opinion on the new tooling or the shift rotation. I was simply a high-functioning appliance to him. But I thought that would change once I had the credentials. During my junior and senior years of college, I treated Ridgeway like my own personal case study. I worked 60 hours a week for the company, attending classes in the mornings and driving straight to the plant afterward, often staying until midnight. I was not on the payroll. Whenever I brought up a salary, my father would chuckle and say, "It all goes into the same pot. Avery, you are working for your future." So I worked for free. I saved the company thousands of dollars by renegotiating a freight contract during my lunch break between lectures. I reorganized the inventory system over a long weekend, implementing a color-coded tagging system that reduced picking errors by 40%. I did this while my friends were going to parties, while Reagan was backpacking through Europe on Dad's credit card. I remember my final semester. I wrote a comprehensive thesis titled "Modernizing Legacy Manufacturing, a Blueprint for Ridgeway Industrial Works." It was 50 pages of detailed analysis. I identified the bottlenecks in our workflow. I proposed a digitization strategy to get us off the paper-heavy system that was drowning us. I calculated the ROI of upgrading our 2 oldest machines. It was brilliant. It was my love letter to the company. I bound it in a nice cover and brought it to my father's office a month before graduation. I was shaking with excitement. I laid it on his desk and said, "Dad, I have been working on this for months. This is how we scale. This is how we get the Halston contract to renew for 10 years instead of 2. He looked at the cover. He patted it with his hand, the way you might pat a dog. "That is nice. Honey," he said, without opening it, "put it over there on the credenza. I have got to call the bank." I put it on the credenza. 2 weeks later, I saw it in the back seat of his car, under a pile of gym clothes and empty coffee cups. The coffee had spilled on the cover, staining the title. He had never opened it, not once. That sting was worse than any physical injury I had ever sustained on the floor. It was the realization that he did not value my mind. He only valued my labor. To him, I was a pair of hands that knew how to follow orders. I was reliable, like a good forklift. You do not ask a forklift for business strategy. You just drive it until the wheels fall off. But I still held on. I held on to the fantasy that the degree was the magic key. I told myself he was just busy, that he was stressed, that once I had the diploma, he would finally sit me down and say, "Okay, Avery, you are ready. Let's run this place together." I graduated with honors. I walked across the stage, scanning the crowd for my family. They were there. Mom was checking her phone. Reagan was looking at her compact mirror. Dad was looking at his watch. They waved when my name was called, a perfunctory gesture, and then went back to their own worlds. And then came the return that was supposed to be my triumph. The most painful part was not the lack of a party. It was the introduction I witnessed 2 days after I came back, a supplier from Ohio. A man named Jim, who I had spoken to on the phone 100 times, came in for a site visit. I walked out to the lobby to greet him, hand extended, ready to finally put a face to the name and discuss the volume discounts I'd been pushing for. But before I could reach him, Reagan swept in. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than my first car. Her hair was perfect. She flashed a blinding smile and extended her hand. "Jim," she said, her voice dripping with charm. "I am Reagan Alexander. I am so glad you could make it. We are so excited about the future of our partnership." Jim looked at her, dazzled. He shook her hand. "Oh, nice to meet you. I usually talk to—" "Avery," Reagan interrupted, gesturing vaguely in my direction as if I were a piece of furniture. "Yes, Avery is around somewhere, but Dad wanted me to personally welcome you. We are making some exciting changes here at Ridgeway, bringing in fresh energy." She led him away toward the conference room. She did not know what volume discounts we needed. She did not know that Jim's company had a history of shipping late in the fourth quarter. She just knew how to walk and talk. I stood there in the lobby, holding a clipboard, feeling like a ghost in my own life. That was the moment the cracks really started to form. It wasn't just that they didn't respect me. It was that they were actively replacing me with a hollow shell. They were taking the credibility I had built, the orders I had fulfilled, the fires I had put out, and they were draping it over Reagan's shoulders like a royal cloak. They wanted the Ridgeway brand to be sleek, young, and effortless. Reagan was effortless. I was effort. I was the sweat stains and the grease under the fingernails. I was the reminder of how hard the work actually was. And they didn't want to see that anymore. They wanted the magic trick without the magician. And so, when I opened that drawer and found the transition plan, it wasn't just a document. It was the answer to every question I had asked myself for 10 years. Why didn't he read my paper? Because I wasn't the successor. Why didn't I get a salary? Because you don't pay equipment you plan to scrap. Why was Reagan in the meetings? Because she was the product, and I was just the packaging. I had given them my childhood. I had given them my teenage years. I had given them my education. And in return, they had drawn up a plan to phase me out like an obsolete software update. They thought I would just fade away. They thought I would be grateful for the scraps they threw me until I disappeared. But standing there in the silence of the archive room, remembering the weight of the swarf bin when I was 10 and the burn of the 60-hour weeks when I was 22, I realized something. They had made a critical error in their calculation. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. They assumed that because I served, I was a servant. They forgot that I was the one who fixed the machines. And if you know how to fix a machine, you also know exactly which bolt to remove to make the whole thing fall apart. The weeks following my discovery in the filing cabinet were not marked by an explosion, but by a suffocation. It was a slow, deliberate tightening of a noose I was not supposed to feel until it was too late. I had returned the folder to its hiding place, and I had returned to my desk, but the world had shifted on its axis. I was no longer working. I was observing. I became a spy in the only home I had ever known. The erasure happened in increments so small that if you were not looking for them, you would think they were just clerical errors. It started with the calendar. For 4 years, even while I was away at university, I had been CC'd on the Monday morning operations forecast. It was a standing invite. I would dial in between classes, muted, just to listen to the pulse of the factory. On the second Monday after my graduation, my Outlook calendar was empty. I refreshed the page. I checked my connection. Nothing. I walked past the glass-walled conference room and saw them there. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother was there, which was unusual for a Monday, looking bored and scrolling on her tablet. And Reagan was there, sitting in the chair that used to be reserved for the operations manager. I stood outside the glass for a moment, holding my coffee mug like a shield. They were laughing. Reagan was gesturing with a pen I knew she did not know how to use to sign a purchase order correctly. No one looked up. No one waved me in. I was not forgotten. I was omitted. Then came the phone calls. I had spent years cultivating relationships with our raw material suppliers. I knew about their kids, their vacations, and exactly how much pressure to apply to get a shipment expedited without ruining the relationship. I called Mike, our contact at the steel foundry in Pennsylvania, to check on a delayed batch of high-carbon rods. The line clicked and then went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, I received an email, not from Mike, but from his assistant. Hi, Avery. We have been instructed to route all communications regarding the Ridgeway account through the executive office to ensure centralized messaging. I have CC'd Reagan on this. I stared at the screen. Centralized messaging, that was a phrase my mother would love. It meant nothing, but it sounded expensive. 2 hours later, I saw Reagan's reply in the chain. Thanks. We are so excited to get that steel. Ridgeway is ready to build. Let us know when it arrives. Best, Reagan. She did not ask about the tensile strength certification. She did not ask if they were shipping via rail or truck, which made a difference of 3 days in arrival time. She just sent exclamation points. I wanted to intervene. I wanted to reply and ask the questions that actually mattered. But I remembered the phrase from the file. Support role. Phase out. If I stepped in, I was just enabling the system that was designed to kill me. So I let the email stand. And when the steel arrived 3 days late because it came by rail, and production stopped for 6 hours, no one blamed Reagan. They just said the supplier was difficult. The inefficiency was staggering. Tasks that I used to handle in 5 minutes with a quick phone call or a text message now turned into 60-minute meetings involving 3 people. I watched from my desk as Reagan, my father, and the floor manager huddled in the office to discuss a packaging issue that I could have solved with a single roll of tape and a new label printer. They spent an hour debating the aesthetics of the box. They talked about branding alignment. Meanwhile, the packers on the floor were standing around, waiting for instructions. While the clock ticked on their hourly wages, I calculated the cost in my head. 5 people standing idle for 1 hour, plus the overhead of the meeting. That was $500 wasted on a conversation about cardboard. But no one called my name, the breaking point, or what should have been the breaking point if I had any pride left. Happened on a Thursday. We had a critical shipment going out to a medical device manufacturer in California. This was a zero-defect client. If one part was out of spec, they rejected the whole lot. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I walked past the loading bay and saw the pallets shrink-wrapped and ready to go. Something looked wrong. The color of the identifying tags was yellow. For medical parts, the tags were supposed to be green. Yellow was for automotive. I stopped. I looked around. The loading dock manager was on his break. Reagan had gone home at 3 o'clock to get her hair done for a dinner. My father was on the golf course with a banker. If those pallets went out with yellow tags, the client's receiving department would reject them automatically without even opening the boxes. It would trigger a non-conformance report. It would cost us $10,000 in penalty fees and return shipping. I stood there, vibrating with the choice. I could walk away. I could let it happen. It was not my job anymore. I was being phased out. Let the new CEO handle the fallout. But then I looked at the boxes. I thought about the guys on the machines who had cut those parts. I thought about the welders who had stayed late to finish the batch. If this order came back, they were the ones who would lose their bonuses. They were the ones who would hear the yelling. I cursed under my breath. I went to the supply closet, got a roll of green tags and a marker, and I went to work. I spent the next 4 hours cutting the plastic wrap, swapping the tags, and rewrapping the pallets by hand. My fingers were raw. My back ached. The warehouse was sweltering, the heat of the day trapped under the metal roof. I finished at 9 o'clock at night. I was alone. I loaded the last pallet onto the truck myself, signing the manifest with my initials, small and cramped in the corner. I drove home in silence, too tired to even turn on the radio. I told myself it was okay. I told myself that as long as the company was safe, as long as the workers were protected, my ego didn't matter. The next morning, there was a stand-up meeting on the floor. My father was there, looking fresh and rested. Reagan was there, holding a cup of herbal tea. "I want to take a moment to thank the team," my father said, his voice booming over the noise of the machines. "That medical shipment went out on time and perfectly spec'd yesterday. The client already emailed to say the tracking looks good." He put an arm around Reagan's shoulders. She beamed, looking humble and capable. "And I want to thank Reagan for overseeing the logistics on that." He continued, "It is a complex account, and she made sure the transition was seamless. Great leadership, sweetheart." Reagan did not flinch. She did not say, "Actually, I left at 3. She just smiled and nodded. "Thanks, Dad. It was a team effort." I stood in the back row, behind a stack of empty crates. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, like a rib cracking. It wasn't the lie that hurt. It was the ease of it. It was how natural it felt for them to take the labor of my hands and turn it into gold for her crown. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back to my office. Later that afternoon, I went to the break room to get water. Benny, one of our oldest forklift drivers, was there. He had known me since I was in braces. He was stirring sugar into his coffee, looking troubled. "Hey, Avery," he said, keeping his voice low. "Hey, Benny." He hesitated, looking at the door to make sure no one was coming. "Listen, I don't want to step out of line, but I got a memo today about the new reporting structure." My stomach dropped. "Oh?" "Yeah," he said. "It says that effective next month, all floor issues go to Reagan. It says your position is being reevaluated for redundancy." He looked at me with pity. Pity from a man I used to supervise. That was a new flavor of humiliation. "They are saying you might be moving on?" he asked, trying to be gentle. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching a rubber band until it snapped. "You know how it is, Benny. Corporate restructuring, just figuring out the best fit." He nodded, but he didn't believe me. He knew. Everyone knew. I was the walking dead. I was a light bulb that had burned for 20 years. And now they were just waiting for the glass to cool down so they could unscrew me and throw me in the trash. I went back to my desk, but I could not work. The charade was over. I needed to know the specifics. The first time I had looked in the file, I had been in shock. I had seen the headlines, but I hadn't looked at the fine print. I hadn't looked at the dates. I waited until 6 o'clock. I waited until the sleek black car that belonged to Reagan and the silver sedan that belonged to my father had both pulled out of the lot. I walked back to the conference room. My heart was not pounding this time. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm, like a funeral drum. I opened the drawer. I found the file. Transition plan. I opened it on the table. This time, I did not just scan. I read. I read with the eyes of a person who is looking for a weapon. I found the implementation schedule on page 3. Phase 1. Soft launch. June 1st. That was 2 weeks ago. Phase 2. Client handover. July 15th. Phase 3. Avery Alexander separation. August 31st. August 31st. They had put an expiration date on me. I had 60 days left. I turned the page. There was a section titled Legal Liability. All operational liabilities to be retained by current operations manager, Avery Alexander, until formal dissolution of the role. New ownership entity, Reagan Alexander, assumes asset control immediately. Liability control deferred until Q4. I stared at the words. It took a moment for the legalese to translate into reality. They were not just firing me, they were using me as a shield. They were transferring the ownership, the profits, the title, the glory, to Reagan immediately. But they were keeping the liability, the risk, the safety compliance, the legal responsibility for accidents or failures, pinned to me until the end of the year. If a machine blew up tomorrow, it was my fault. If the company made $1 million tomorrow, it was Reagan's money, and there, at the bottom of the page, was a draft signature line, prepared by Marcus Thorne, Esquire. Marcus was my father's golf buddy. He had known me since I was 5. He had given me a savings bond for my high school graduation, and here he was, drafting the legal framework to ruin me. I took my phone out. I did not rush. I laid each page flat. I smoothed out the creases. I took high-resolution photos of the dates. I took photos of the liability clause. I took photos of the draft signature. I was not angry. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. What I felt was cold. It was the absolute zero of emotion. I thought about the night before. I thought about the 4 hours I spent sweating in the warehouse, fixing the tags so the company wouldn't lose money. I thought about how I did it to protect the family business. I realized then that there was no family business. There was just a business. And a family that preyed on it. I put the file back. I aligned the edges perfectly. I closed the drawer. I walked out of the building and into the parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the asphalt. I got into my car and sat there. I expected to cry. I waited for the tears. I waited for the heartbreak. But my eyes were dry. I didn't cry because you only cry when you lose something you think you can get back. You cry when there is hope. I had lost the only thing that had kept me going for 20 years. I had lost the belief that if I just worked hard enough, if I just bled enough, if I just cared enough, they would finally see me. They saw me. All right, they saw a mule. And you don't thank a mule. You work it until it collapses, and then you buy a show pony. I started the engine. The radio came on. Some pop song about love and loss. I turned it off. I preferred the silence. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to beg. August 31st. They had given me a deadline. They didn't know it. But they had also given me a head start. I drove out of the gate, watching the factory recede in my rearview mirror. It looked different now. It didn't look like my home. It looked like a target, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about how to save it. I was thinking about what would happen when the person holding up the sky finally decided to let go. The most dangerous thing about a fire is not always the heat. It is the assumption that someone else is coming to put it out. For 10 years. I had been the designated firefighter of Ridgeway Industrial Works. I was the one who smelled the smoke before anyone else saw the flame. I was the one who ran toward the heat while everyone else was busy debating who started it. But on the Monday morning after I discovered the transition plan, I made a decision that felt more radical than burning the building down myself. I decided to let it burn. I did not quit. Quitting would have been emotional. Quitting would have been a reaction, and I was done reacting. I was initiating. I walked into the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, dressed in my usual blazer and slacks, and I sat down at my desk. I did not storm into my father's office. I did not throw the photos of the documents in Reagan's face. I simply opened my employee handbook, a dusty binder that had not been updated in 6 years, and I read the section on standard operating hours, 8 a.m. to 5:19 a.m. I also read the job description for a support role, which was the title they had assigned to me in their secret spreadsheet. Support staff do not authorize high-level technical changes. Support staff do not negotiate with vendors after hours. Support staff do not fix the mess. They only file the paperwork for the mess. So, I became the perfect employee. I became exactly who they said I was. The first test came at 10 o'clock that morning. A notification popped up on my screen from our primary aluminum supplier in Ohio. It was a flagged email. High priority. The subject line read, "Urgent. Alloy specification mismatch on P04402. In the old life, the life of Avery the Fixer." I would have picked up the phone immediately. I knew exactly what the problem was without even opening the attachment. We often substituted one grade of aluminum for another when the supply was tight. Provided the tensile strength was higher, it was a standard deviation that required a quick technical sign-off to clear the compliance check. It was a 5-minute conversation that I had successfully navigated 100 times. I hovered my mouse over the reply button. My instinct screamed at me to fix it. I could hear the clock ticking on the production schedule. If that metal did not ship by noon, the milling machines would be idle by Thursday. I took a deep breath, released the mouse, and picked up my coffee cup. I opened a new email window. Subject: FWD, alloy specification mismatch. On P04402. To Reagan Alexander, C. Gordon Alexander. Hi Reagan, please see the attached query from the vendor regarding the aluminum specs for the upcoming run. Since this involves a decision on material substitution and impacts the core product line, I am forwarding this to you as the project lead for decision-making. Please let them know how you would like to proceed. Best. Avery. I hit send, then I archived the email and went back to organizing my desktop icons. It felt terrifying. It felt like watching a toddler wander toward a swimming pool. But I had to remind myself that Reagan was not a toddler. She was the incoming CEO. She was the one receiving the accolades, the salary, and the future. If she wanted the chair, she had to sit in it. 20 minutes later, Reagan replied, I was blind copied, likely by accident, or perhaps because she didn't know the difference between CC and BCC. Hi guys, thanks for checking in. We definitely want the best quality for our customers, so let us stick to the plan. Whatever is on the original order is what we need. Let us not complicate things. Thanks. Reagan? I stared at the screen. Stick to the plan. Do not complicate things. The original order specified a grade of aluminum that was currently on a 6-week back order nationwide. That was why we did the substitution. By telling them to stick to the original order, she had just effectively paused production for a month and a half. I did not correct her. I did not run down the hall to explain the global supply chain crisis. I simply filed her email under a new folder I had named Leadership Directives. The supplier replied an hour later, Understood. We will place the order in the queue for the original spec. Estimated delivery is 6 weeks. Please confirm acceptance of delay. Reagan did not reply to that one. She probably didn't understand what it meant. She was likely at lunch. For the first few days, the silence was almost deafening. The factory ran on momentum. The systems I had built were robust. They were designed to withstand a certain amount of negligence. The machines kept humming, the trucks kept arriving, and my family walked around with an air of smug satisfaction. I could see it in the way my mother looked at me during dinner. She had this benevolent, pitying smile, as if to say, See? The world does not stop spinning just because you are doing less. They thought my silence was submission. They thought I had accepted my fate as the support role and was finally learning my place. They interpreted the lack of crisis as proof that I had been exaggerating my workload all along. If Reagan can handle it this easily, my father probably thought, then Avery really was making a mountain out of a molehill. But momentum is a finite resource. Friction eventually wins. The cracks started to appear on Thursday afternoon. I was packing my bag at 4:55. This was a revolutionary act in itself. For 10 years, 5 o'clock was just the time I switched from coffee to energy drinks. Now, it was the end of my day. My office phone rang. It was the floor supervisor. Miller, Avery. You there? He sounded stressed. I am here. Miller, what is up? I have got the guys standing around on line 3. The specs for the bracket assembly are missing the tolerance data for the drill holes. The blueprint in the system is just a 3D render, not the technical schematic. We cannot drill until we know the depth. I knew exactly where the schematic was. It was on a secure server drive that only management could access because it contained proprietary patent info. I used to just go in, print it, and run it down to him. I checked my watch. 4:58. That sounds like a documentation issue. Miller, I said, keeping my voice even. Yeah, that is why I'm calling. Can you pull it? We are burning daylight here. I hesitated. I could hear the background noise of the shop, the hiss of air compressors, the clatter of tools. These were my guys. If they didn't hit their quota, they didn't get their efficiency bonus. It wasn't their fault that leadership was incompetent. The guilt surged up in my throat, tasting like bile. I was punishing Miller to prove a point to my father. Was that fair? But then I remembered the transition plan. Support role. Phase out. If I fixed this, Reagan would take credit for the smooth operation at the next meeting. If I fixed this, my father would continue to believe that Reagan was a capable leader. My competence was the mortar holding their bricks together. If I wanted them to see the cracks, I had to stop patching the wall. I am actually not authorized to access the secure schematic drive anymore. Miller, I lied. Or rather, I told a truth from the future. Under the new transition plan, data control has moved to the executive office to ensure security. You will have to call Gordon or Reagan to get that file released. There was a silence on the line. Reagan? Miller asked. He sounded like I had told him to ask the office cat for the nuclear codes. She is the point of contact for operational data now. I said, sorry, Miller. My hands are tied. I hung up before he could argue. I picked up my bag. I walked out of my office, down the hall, and past the open door of the conference room where my father and Reagan were looking at fabric swatches for new office chairs. Good night, I said as I passed. They looked up, startled. Leaving already? My father asked, checking his watch. It is only 5, per my contract, I said cheerfully. See you tomorrow. I walked out to my car. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I drove 2 blocks away, pulled into a grocery store parking lot, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. I felt sick. I felt like a traitor. But as I sat there, watching normal people buy milk and bread, I realized that for the first time in a decade, I was not thinking about the drill depth of a bracket. I was not mentally calculating shipping routes. My brain was quiet. By the second week, the quiet was gone, replaced by the noise of things falling apart. The aluminum delay hit the schedule. The production manager sent a frantic email to the whole team asking why there was a gap in the material flow. Reagan replied, blaming the global market conditions. Then the customers started calling. I was sitting at my desk when the phone rang. It was Sarah, the procurement officer for a large automotive client. We had a standing lunch date once a quarter. She liked me. She trusted me. Avery, what is going on over there? She asked, skipping the pleasantries. I sent a request for a quote adjustment 3 days ago. Usually, you get back to me in an hour. I got an email from someone named Reagan this morning that didn't even address the pricing model. It just said, "We value your business," and attached a brochure. I don't need a brochure. Avery, I need the numbers. I leaned back in my chair. This was the moment. This was the pivot. I am so sorry about that. Sarah, I said, keeping my voice professional and polite. As you might have heard, Ridgeway is going through some exciting structural changes. The leadership wants to streamline communication. All pricing and high-level negotiation is now being handled directly by the ownership team to ensure you get the best service. But I want to talk to you, she said. You know our account. You know the history. I know. Sarah, and I appreciate that. but the new protocol requires that the CEO handle these financial decisions. I am just in a support role now. I don't have the authority to approve the adjustment you need. You will have to reply to Reagan and ask for a specific breakdown." There was a pause. I could hear her typing. "A support role? You? Since when?" "Since the restructuring," I said. She made a noise that sounded like a scoff. "Well, that is certainly a choice." "All right, Avery, I will email Reagan, but tell your father that if I don't get those numbers by Friday, I am opening the bid to other vendors. I will pass that along." I said, "I did not pass it along. I let Sarah tell them herself." That Friday. The storm finally broke inside the office. My father stormed out of his office, his face red, holding a printout of an email. He marched straight to my desk. "Avery!" he barked. I looked up from my computer, where I was slowly and meticulously organizing digital files. "Yes. Dad? Why is the Halston account flagging a delivery error?" "They are saying the parts we sent yesterday were rejected. The entire lot." I looked at him calmly. That would be the yellow tags. I thought, but I didn't say that. I'm not sure. I said, "I haven't been involved in the shipping QA for that order. Reagan signed off on the logistics." He slammed the paper down on my desk. "I know Reagan signed off on it, but you are supposed to be checking her work. You are supposed to be the safety net." "Avery." I stood up slowly. I kept my hands folded in front of me. I looked him in the eye. The man who had planned to phase me out. The man who had decided my value was expiring on August 31st. "I am confused. Dad," I said, "I was under the impression that the goal of the transition plan was to empower Reagan to take full ownership. If I continue to do the work for her, she will never learn. I am stepping back to allow her the space to lead. Isn't that what you wanted?" He opened his mouth to yell, but the words got stuck. He couldn't say, "No, I want you to do the work while she takes the credit." He couldn't say that out loud, not without admitting the lie at the center of our lives. He ground his teeth. "We are losing money. Avery, this rejection is going to cost us $15,000 in rework." I nodded sympathetically. "That is a difficult learning curve. I am sure Reagan will not make that mistake twice." He looked at me with a mixture of fury and confusion. He was looking for the daughter who would jump up, apologize, and offer to work all weekend to fix it. He was looking for the doormat, but the doormat was gone. "Fix it," he growled. "Call Halston. Smooth it over." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 5:10. "I would love to help," I said, "but I have an appointment. And besides, Halston asked specifically to speak to the person in charge. If I call them, it undermines Reagan's authority. It makes us look disorganized. You or Reagan should make the call. It shows executive attention." I picked up my purse. "Have a good weekend, Dad." I walked out. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. The hardest part was not the confrontation with him. The hardest part was seeing the confusion on the faces of the staff as I left. I saw Miller watching me from the hallway. He looked tired. He looked worried. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't understand the game being played. I sat in my car that evening, and the guilt came back. Heavier than before. I was hurting the company. I was hurting the legacy. Was I just being petty? Was I burning down the house because I didn't get the biggest room? But then I thought about the signature on the legal document. I thought about the liability clause. They were willing to let me go to prison for their mistakes. They were willing to bankrupt me to protect Reagan. This wasn't petty. This was survival. I realized then that for my entire life, I had equated my worth with my utility. I thought I only mattered if I was useful. I thought I only existed if I was fixing something. But as I drove away from the factory, leaving the chaos behind me, leaving the unreturned calls and the panic and the mess, I took a breath. My lungs filled with air. My heart continued to beat. The sky did not fall. I asked myself the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind for weeks. If I step out, will I die? I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were not covered in grease. They were not shaking. No. I thought, I won't die. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of Ridgeway Industrial Works, And in that lightness, in that terrifying, empty space where the burden used to be, I realized something else. I wasn't dying. I was just waking up. And the world outside that factory was much, much bigger than I had ever been told. The isolation I had imposed upon myself was supposed to be a shield, a way to distance my emotions from the inevitable collapse of the company. But the funny thing about stepping back is that it allows others to see you more clearly. When you are in the trenches, covered in mud, you are just part of the landscape. When you stand up and wipe your hands clean, suddenly, you become distinct. It happened on a humid Tuesday morning in the loading bay. I was down there not to work, but to retrieve a personal package I had mistakenly had shipped to the office address. A set of noise-canceling headphones I intended to use to drown out my mother's voice. Saul, the logistics coordinator for our biggest freight partner, was there. Saul was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite, 60 years old with hands the size of baseball mitts. He had been moving Ridgeway steel for 20 years. He watched me sign for my package. He didn't smile. He looked around the chaotic dock, where boxes were piled in precarious, disorganized stacks, a stark contrast to the laser grid precision I used to enforce. "Avery," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the forklifts. "Can I ask you a question?" I looked up, clicking my pen closed. "Sure." "Saul," he leaned in, lowering his voice so the nearby packers couldn't hear. "How long are you going to let them play dress-up with your factory?" I froze. I tried to play dumb. "I don't know what you mean. We are just restructuring." Saul spat on the concrete, a gesture of pure disrespect he never would have shown in the old days. "Restructuring. That is a fancy word for a screw-up. I tried to confirm the weight limits for the interstate haul with your sister yesterday. She asked me if the truck could just drive slower to handle the extra tonnage." He looked me dead in the eye. "She's going to get someone killed, Avery, and you are too smart to be standing here watching it happen. You think nobody notices who actually runs this place? You think we don't talk?" He tapped the clipboard against his chest. "There are 5 other manufacturers in this county who would kill to have someone who understands yield rates like you do. Do not let loyalty to a name on a building ruin your life. You are worth more than the scrap metal they are turning this place into." He walked away before I could answer, climbing into his cab and blasting the air horn. I stood there, clutching my package, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged the reality of the situation out loud. It was the first time anyone had suggested that I had value not because I was an Alexander, but because I was Avery. That afternoon, the seed Saul planted began to sprout. I was clearing out my inbox, deleting old newsletters, archiving project files, when I saw an email from a name I hadn't seen in 2 years. David Thorne, not the lawyer, but a former project manager at Halston Dynamics who had left to start his own boutique engineering firm. The subject line was simple. "Coffee?" I opened it. "Hi, Avery. I heard through the grapevine that Ridgeway is shifting its leadership model. I know you are probably swamped helping the family, but I wanted to reach out. I am building a consulting arm for mid-sized manufacturers who need operational turnarounds. I am not hiring right now, but if there is ever a day you decide you want to step out of the family shadow and do some independent consulting, I would love to be your first call. No pressure, just a thought." I read the email 3 times. Independent consulting. The words tasted strange, exotic. I had never considered myself independent. I was an appendage of Ridgeway. But here was David, a man I respected, telling me that my skill set was a commodity. He wasn't asking for Ridgeway. He was asking for me. I didn't reply immediately. I flagged the email and moved it to a secure, private folder on my personal drive. But the mere existence of that email changed the air in the room. It meant that August 31st didn't have to be an execution date. It could be a liberation day. Energized by this new perspective, I decided to do something I should have done years ago. I opened a blank document and titled it, Inventory of Responsibilities. I started typing. I wanted to see it in black and white. I wanted to know exactly what they were phasing out, 1. Technical liaison for all Tier 1 clients. 2. Safety compliance officer, OSHA reporting. 3. ISO 9001 certification lead. 4. Supply chain crisis management. 5. Internal training and development. 6. ERP system administrator. The list went on and on. It grew to 3 pages single-spaced. As I typed, a cold realization began to wash over me. I wasn't just doing a job. I was the structural integrity of the entire organization. But then I hit a snag. As I listed my role as the ERP system administrator, I logged into the back end of our enterprise software to check the user permissions. I wanted to see if they had already started revoking my access. They hadn't. In fact, it was the opposite. I navigated to the approval workflows section. This was the digital brain of the company, the logic that told the system who was allowed to sign off on checks over $10,000. Who could authorize a release of hazardous materials? And who could approve a final engineering change? Every single critical workflow was hard-coded to my user ID, A.A. Alexander. Reagan's account existed, but it had read-only access for most critical functions. My father's account was active, but he barely knew how to reset his password. I sat back, staring at the glowing screen. They were phasing me out on paper. They were removing my name from the website and the org chart. But in the digital reality of the company, the place where the work actually happened, they were still using me as the keystone. They were keeping my digital ghost alive to run the machine while they pretended I didn't exist. If I left on August 31st and they deleted my account, the entire approval chain would break. No one would be able to pay a vendor. No one would be able to ship a hazardous load. And then, a darker thought occurred to me. I minimized the window and opened the digital archives. I searched for authorization and power of attorney years ago, when I was 22 and just starting to take on real responsibility. My father had rushed into my office with a stack of papers, just standard stuff. "Avery," he had said, sweating and impatient, "bank authorizations, compliance guarantees. We need to update the signatories so you can handle the inspectors when I'm playing golf. Just sign here, here, and here." I had signed. I trusted him. He was my father. I found the document scanned in the legal folder. It wasn't just a bank authorization. It was a technical guarantor agreement for our liability insurance. I read the fine print, my stomach churning. The undersigned, Avery Alexander, assumes personal professional liability for the verification of all safety-critical components manufactured under Class A specifications. I read it again. Personal professional liability. It meant that if a part failed and killed someone, the insurance company wouldn't just sue Ridgeway. They would come after me. Personally, my future assets, my reputation, my certification, and the date on the document showed it was valid for 10 years. It had 3 years left on it. They were firing me, but they were keeping me as the designated scapegoat if Reagan's incompetence caused a catastrophe after I left. My name was still on the bottom line of the insurance policy guaranteeing the quality of the work. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of adrenaline. This was not just unfair. It was predatory. They had legally shackled me to the sinking ship. While I was discovering the depth of their betrayal, they were busy polishing the surface. Reagan's face was everywhere. The local business journal ran a feature story titled, "The New Steel: How Reagan Alexander is Modernizing a Legacy." I walked into the break room and saw the magazine lying on the table. There was Reagan on the cover, wearing a hard hat that looked absurdly clean, holding a blueprint she probably thought was a placemat. I picked it up and read the article. It was a masterpiece of fiction. "I want to bring a fresh perspective," Reagan was quoted as saying. "For too long, this industry has been stuck in the past. We need to focus on brand synergy and customer experience, not just nuts and bolts." My mother, Marianne, was quoted as the Director of Strategy, a title she had invented the week prior. "Reagan has always had the vision," Mom said in the article. "She is the natural leader our family has been waiting for." There was no mention of me. Not one word. I wasn't even listed as a sibling. In the narrative they were constructing for the public, I had been erased completely. I was not even a footnote. It was psychological warfare. They were rewriting history in real time. They wanted to make sure that when I finally left, no one would ask where I went, because no one would remember I had ever been there. My mother began stopping by my desk more frequently, dropping off stacks of grunt work with a breezy nonchalance. "Avery, sweetheart," she said, dropping a pile of tax receipts on my keyboard. "Reagan is doing a video shoot for the website this afternoon, so she doesn't have time to sort these for the accountant. Be a dear and handle it. It needs to be done by 5. She didn't wait for an answer. She just turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the linoleum. I looked at the receipts. They were for business development dinners. $500 at a steakhouse, $300 at a sushi bar. Dates that coincided with Reagan's strategy meetings. I was organizing the evidence of their excess while they were plotting my obsolescence, but the universe has a way of balancing the scales, usually when you least expect it. It was Thursday, just after lunch. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, eating a sandwich and reading through the finer points of contract law on my phone, trying to understand how to break the guarantor agreement. My phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the screen. He never called me during the day anymore. If he needed something, he sent an email or shouted down the hall. I let it ring twice before answering. I put on my support role voice, calm, detached, unhelpful. "Hello, this is Avery." "Avery!" His voice was high, tight, and trembling. It was the sound of a man who had just looked over a cliff and seen no bottom. "Avery, where are you?" "I am on my lunch break." "Dad, what do you need?" "You need to come to the office, now." I took a bite of my sandwich. "I am actually off the clock for another 20 minutes. Is it urgent?" "Avery, stop it!" he screamed, and I heard the genuine terror in his throat. "It is Halston. Halston." The name hung in the air. "What about Halston?" I asked, my pulse quickening despite my resolve. "They are here," he whispered. "Excuse me?" "The VP of Operations from Halston Dynamics, and their head of quality control. They just walked into the lobby. They didn't make an appointment. They are demanding a site audit, right now. A surprise audit. The nuclear option. Clients only did that when they suspected fraud or catastrophic incompetence." I swallowed. "That sounds like a job for the CEO. Dad, why don't you send Reagan out?" "I can't send Reagan," he hissed. "They are asking questions about the metallurgical variants in the last 3 shipments. They are asking about the ISO protocols. They have a binder." "Avery, they have a binder full of data. Reagan doesn't know what a variance is. Then you should talk to them." I said, "You are the chairman. I don't know the new codes," he stammered. "You changed the system 2 years ago. I don't know how to explain the traceability logs." Silence stretched between us. I could hear him breathing, short, shallow gasps. "Avery, please," he begged. "They said if they don't get satisfactory answers in the next hour, they are pulling the contract, all of it. That is 60% of our revenue. We will be insolvent in a month." I looked out the windshield at the factory. I saw the sleek black car of the Halston executives parked right in front of the door. This was it. The moment I had predicted. The moment the system crashed. I could go in there and save them. I could walk in with my knowledge, charm the executives, pull the logs, explain the variants, and smooth it all over. I could be the hero one last time. But then I looked at the magazine on my passenger seat, the new steel. I thought about the phase-out plan. I thought about the liability clause that would leave me holding the bag if this went south. "Dad," I said softly. "Yes, yes. Are you coming?" "I am coming in," I said, "but I'm not coming to save you." "What? What does that mean?" "It means," I said, starting the car, "that if I walk into that room, we are going to have a very different conversation than the one you are expecting. I am done being the ghost. Dad, if I speak to Halston, I speak as Avery Alexander, not as Reagan's support staff. Just get in here," he yelled. "I don't care what you call yourself. Just fix it." He hung up. I sat there for a moment. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like a support staff member. I looked like a woman who was holding the detonator. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, the one containing the photos of the transition plan. The photos of the yellow tags I had swapped, and the guarantor document I had found. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to tell the truth. I opened the car door and stepped out into the heat. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of my life. I walked toward the front door. I wasn't walking to my execution. I was walking to my graduation. Finally, the phone was still hot against my ear, the connection pulsing with my father's panic. I stood on the pavement outside the glass doors of Ridgeway Industrial Works, the sun beating down on the back of my neck, but I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Through the reflective glass, I could see the blurred shapes of the lobby, the reception desk, the potted fern, and the distinct, shark-like silhouettes of the Halston Dynamics executives. They were not sitting, they were pacing. My father's voice cracked through the speaker, stripping away the polished veneer of the chairman title he loved so much. "They are asking about the sheer stress ratings on the batch from March," he stammered. "They are asking why we switched the coolant mixture on the CNC machines during the second quarter. They have the audit logs. Avery, they are pointing at lines of data that I do not understand." I listened to him, and for the first time, I did not feel the urge to rush in and translate. I leaned against the hot metal of my car door. "Those are standard operational queries." "Dad," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "The coolant switch was documented in the Q2 efficiency report. It is on the server. Reagan has access to it. Just tell her to open the folder labeled Production Optimization." There was a silence on the other end, followed by the sound of shuffling papers and a hushed, frantic whisper. Then his voice came back, lower this time, desperate. "Reagan is in there. Avery." She opened the folder. She showed them the graphs. And they stopped her. They closed the laptop. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, because when they asked her why the variance occurred, she told them it was a strategic alignment of resources, he said, his voice trembling with the humiliation of it. She used marketing words for an engineering problem. The VP of Halston looked at me and said, "He does not care about our strategy. He wants to know if the metal is going to fatigue under load." He asked me if anyone in this building actually knows the science behind the product, or if we are just a sales office now. I closed my eyes. It was the moment of truth, the moment where the rubber met the road. You can fake a brand. You can fake a website. You cannot fake physics. So tell them. I said, "I can't," he hissed. "I haven't run the floor in 15 years. I don't know the new alloy compositions." "Then you have a problem," I said. "Avery, please," he begged, and the desperation in his tone was thick enough to choke on. "They demanded to see you." "Me?" I asked. "Not the CEO?" "They said they want the person who signed the certs," he admitted, the words dragging out of him like pulled teeth. "They said they have been tracking the correspondence for 5 years. They said every time there was a crisis, it was Avery Alexander who fixed it. They said they don't want to talk to the figurehead. They want the architect. They want the person they trust." The word hung in the humid air between us. Trust. That was it. That was the currency they had been spending without my permission. They treated my credibility like a company credit card, maxing it out to buy Reagan her title, assuming the bill would never come due. They thought they could strip me of my power, my future, and my name, but keep the trust I had earned with blood and sweat. They wanted the ghost to haunt the machine, keeping it running while they lived in the mansion. I looked at the glass doors again. I could walk in there. I could save the contract. I could prove, once and for all, that I was the only one capable of running this company. But if I walked in there now, without terms, without a contract, without protection, I would just be proving that I was their creature. I would be proving that no matter how much they beat me down, I would always come running when they whistled. "Avery, are you there?" my father asked. "Just come in, just for this meeting." Just explain the coolant data. We can figure out the rest later." "The rest?" I asked. "You mean the part where I'm phased out by August 31st? I heard a sharp intake of breath. "We can review that," he said quickly. Too quickly. "We can review the timeline. Once we get past this crisis, we will sit down. I promise. We will look at the org chart again. Just don't let them walk out the door. Avery, this account is $2 million a year. It is everything. It was the just this once trap. It was the same logic that had kept me working 60-hour weeks for free. It was the promise of a future reward that never materialized. He wasn't offering me a partnership. He was offering me a temporary stay of execution because he needed a body to throw on the grenade. I looked at my watch. It was 12:30. "I'm not coming in." "Dad," I said. "What?" "You said you were coming." "I said I was coming to the office." I corrected him. "But I am not walking into that room to bail you out. Not like this. Not as a favor. Avery, you are killing us," he shouted, his control snapping. "No, Dad," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You killed it the day you signed that transition plan. You just didn't realize it takes a while for the body to get cold." I hung up. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally cutting the cord. I looked at the building one last time. I saw the door open. Reagan came running out, looking frantic, her phone to her ear. She looked around the parking lot, scanning for my car. I ducked down, put the car in reverse, and backed out of the space. I drove toward the exit. I did not look back. I left them there with their binder of data they couldn't read and their client they couldn't fool. I drove aimlessly for an hour, the silence of the car acting as a decompression chamber. I felt lightheaded. I had just risked the entire family fortune. I had just risked the livelihood of every person in that factory. The guilt tried to claw its way back up, whispering that I was selfish, that I was petty. But then I remembered the yellow tags. I remembered the nights I slept on the office floor. I remembered the transition plan with its cold, clinical phase-out status. I was not the villain of this story. I was just the inevitable consequence of their actions. I stopped at a copy shop near the university. I had the files on my phone, the photos I had taken in the dark, the screenshots of the org chart, the liability document. "I need these printed." I told the clerk, high resolution, color. I stood there as the machine whirred, spitting out the pages one by one, the ownership transfer page, the support role page, the signature page with the lawyer's draft stamp. I organized them into a neat stack. I bought a simple black presentation folder. I slid the pages inside. It looked innocent. It looked like a homework assignment, but it was a bomb. I drove home to my apartment, showered, and dressed with deliberate care. I put on the dress I had worn to my graduation, the one they had barely looked at. I did my hair. I put on lipstick. I was not going to dinner as the tired, grease-stained mechanic. I was going as the prosecutor. The family dinner was a mandatory ritual. Every Tuesday night, no matter what happened at the factory, we were expected to gather at my parents' house. It was part of the perfect family image my mother cultivated. We would eat roast chicken, drink wine, and pretend that we were the Kennedys of manufacturing. Tonight, I knew the atmosphere would be different. I arrived at the house at 7 o'clock sharp. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn that Ridgway's profits paid for. My father's silver sedan was in the driveway. Reagan's convertible was parked next to it. I walked up the steps, clutching the black folder against my chest. I took a deep breath. This was the house where I had grown up. This was the table where I had done my homework. This was where I had learned that love was conditional on performance. I opened the door and walked in. The silence in the house was thick, heavy, and suffocating. I could hear the clink of silverware from the dining room. They had started without me. I walked into the dining room. My mother was seated at the foot of the table, perfectly composed, cutting a piece of asparagus. Reagan was on her right, looking pale, her eyes red-rimmed, staring at her phone. My father was at the head of the table, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked 10 years older than he had this morning. When I entered, the motion in the room stopped. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. My father put his glass down. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You have some nerve," he said, his voice low and vibrating with anger. "You left us there. You just drove away." I pulled out my chair, the one on the left, the one that always faced away from the window, and sat down. I placed the black folder on the table in front of me. I smoothed the cover. "I didn't leave you," I said, reaching for the water pitcher. "I just declined to participate in a fraud." "Fraud?" my mother snapped, her composure cracking. "Do not use that word in this house. Avery, we were protecting the company, protecting your inheritance." "My inheritance?" I asked. Looking at her, "You mean the support role? The one that phases out in August?" Reagan looked up, her eyes narrowing. "You are being dramatic. It was just a bad meeting. Halston is just posturing. They won't leave. They need us. They don't need you." "Reagan," I said quietly, "they need the person who knows why the coolant mixture matters, and that person was not in the room." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Enough!" he shouted. "We are not doing this tonight. We are going to eat dinner, and tomorrow morning, you are going to go into the office. You are going to call Halston, and you are going to fix this mess. You are going to apologize for being unavailable, and you are going to get them to sign the renewal." He pointed a finger at me. "And if you don't, Avery, if you let this contract die out of spite, then you are done. You hear me? You are out of this family." I looked at his finger. I looked at his red face. I looked at the fear behind his anger. He was trying to command me, but he had no leverage left. He just didn't know it yet. I picked up the folder. I opened it. "I am already out. Dad," I said, "you saw to that yourself." I took out the first page, the one with the ownership transfer header, and slid it across the polished wood of the table until it rested in front of him. He looked down. He saw the document. He saw the date. His face went from red to a ghostly, ashen gray. He froze. My mother stopped eating. She didn't look at the paper. She looked at me, and her eyes were cold, calculating, assessing the damage. "You went into my files." My father whispered. "I went into the archives. I corrected him, the ones I manage, the ones I built." Reagan leaned over to look at the paper. She frowned. "What is that?" "It is the reason I didn't come in today." I said to her, "It is the plan, the real plan, not the one you talk about in the magazines." My mother put her fork down. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Calm as a glacier. "You were not supposed to see that." "Avery," she said, "it was not ready." "Not ready?" I laughed. A short, sharp sound that held no humor. "It is signed. Mom, it has dates. August 31st. That is ready." "We were going to tell you when the time was right," she said, her voice smooth, trying to soothe a wild animal. "We didn't want to hurt your feelings. We know how attached you are to the operational side. But Avery, darling, you have to be realistic. You are a worker. You are excellent with your hands, but you are not a leader. You don't have the presence. Reagan has the presence." The words hung there. "You are a worker." It was the ultimate dismissal. It was the confirmation that in their eyes, I was a different species. I was the help. I looked at Reagan. She was staring at the paper, then at me. There was no guilt in her face, only annoyance that she had been caught. "It is just a structural change." "Avery," Reagan said, rolling her eyes, "you act like we are murdering you. You would still have a job. You would just report to me. It makes sense. I am better at the client-facing stuff. You hate people. I hate liars." I said, "There is a difference." I turned back to my father. He was still staring at the document, unable to look me in the eye. "So that is it?" I asked. "I save the Halston account tomorrow. And then what? I go back to being phased out? I train Reagan to do my job, and then you show me the door? We would take care of you." He mumbled, still looking at the table. "We would give you a severance, a consulting fee, a severance." I repeated. For 10 years of my life, for building the systems that made you rich. I reached into the folder again. I pulled out the second document, the liability agreement, the one that made me the personal guarantor for the safety of every product we shipped. I slid it next to the first one. And what about this? I asked. My father looked at it. He flinched as if I had slapped him. You want me to leave, I said, my voice rising slightly, cutting through the room. You want to give the company to Reagan? Fine. But you kept my name on the liability insurance. You kept me as the legal guarantor for the quality control. I looked at Reagan. Did you know that? Did you know that if you screw up a shipment and a plane falls out of the sky, I am the one who goes to jail? Not you. Me. Reagan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Dad. Is that true? He didn't answer. He couldn't. My mother intervened. Her voice sharp. It was a technicality. Avery, your father just didn't get around to updating the paperwork. Don't try to make this into a conspiracy. It is not a conspiracy. I said, it is an insurance policy. You wanted my skill to protect you, but you didn't want to pay for it, and you certainly didn't want to honor it. You wanted me to be the safety net while Reagan walked the tightrope. I stood up. My legs felt solid. My hands were steady. Well, the net is gone, I said. I looked at my father. Halston wants an answer tomorrow. They want to know who is responsible. I pointed at the folder. You have a choice. You can admit to Halston that the new leadership is a fraud and beg them to stay. Or you can tell them the truth, that the person they trust is currently being phased out by her own family. I picked up my purse. I'm going home. If you want me to talk to Halston, if you want me to step 1 foot back inside that factory, you will need to draft a new contract. And this time, Marcus isn't going to write it. My lawyer is... I turned to leave. Avery! My mother called out, her voice losing its polish, becoming shrill. If you walk out that door, you are destroying this family. You are choosing money over blood. I stopped at the archway. I looked back at them, the 3 of them, sitting around a table loaded with food they hadn't cooked, in a house paid for by work they hadn't done. I didn't choose money. Mom, I said softly, I chose me. I walked out into the cool night air. Behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering, my father throwing his Scotch glass against the wall. But I didn't flinch. I just got in my car and drove away, leaving the debris of their lies scattered on the dining room table. The gravel of my parents' driveway crunched under my tires at exactly 7 o'clock. I did not arrive 5 minutes early to help set the table, as I had done for the last 15 years. I did not park around the back to leave the prime spots for guests. I parked right in the center of the driveway, next to my father's sedan, and I walked to the front door with the steady, measured pace of a stranger. I rang the doorbell. I had a key, of course, on the same ring as my factory key, but I chose not to use it. When the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, opened the door, she looked startled. Miss Avery? You rang? Good evening. Mrs. Gable? I said, stepping past her into the foyer. I am here for dinner. I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the one with the gold rim that was usually reserved for Thanksgiving or potential investors. My father was already seated at the head, nursing a drink that looked like pure Scotch. My mother, Mary Ann, sat opposite him, arranging her napkin with the precision of a surgeon. I pulled out the chair on the left side of the table, the guest seat, and sat down. I did not offer to pour the water. I did not ask how their day was. I simply placed the black presentation folder on the table in front of me, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the placemat. The silence in the room was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. My father looked at me, his eyes darting to the folder and then away, as if it were a loaded gun. Where is your sister? My mother asked, breaking the silence without looking up. She is late. She is building the brand. I said, my voice neutral, as if on cue. The double doors swung open and Reagan breezed in. She was holding her phone up, the screen illuminating her face, her thumb scrolling rapidly. She didn't even look at us. She walked straight to her seat, laughing at something on the screen. "Oh my God, you guys have to see this," she said, dropping into her chair. "The post about the modernization of Ridgeway is blowing up. We have got like 400 likes in an hour. People are loving the new era narrative. Look at this comment. Finally, a fresh face for an old industry." She turned the phone toward me, her smile bright and oblivious. "Isn't that great? Avery, it is all about engagement. We are finally controlling the story." I looked at the phone. I saw the photo of the factory floor, a floor I had swept, painted, and organized. I saw her face superimposed over my work. It is very impressive. "Reagan," I said, "it is amazing what you can achieve with good lighting and no accountability." Reagan's smile faltered. She pulled the phone back. "What is that supposed to mean? You are just jealous because I understand social media and you are stuck in the dark ages." I didn't answer her. I reached for the folder. The sound of the plastic cover opening was sharp in the quiet room. "I am not jealous," I said. "I am just fact-checking." I took out the first document. It was the ownership transfer page, enlarged and printed in high definition. I didn't slide it. I placed it gently in the center of the table, directly under the chandelier, so the light hit the bold text, "Transfer of majority control to Reagan, Alexander." My father froze. He had his glass halfway to his mouth, and he just held it there, the amber liquid trembling slightly. Reagan leaned forward, squinting. "What is that?" "It is the future," I said. "Or at least, the version of it you thought I wouldn't see until it was too late." I looked at my father. His face had drained of color, leaving him looking gray and old. He set the glass down with a clatter. "Avery," he croaked, "where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" I asked. "Is it true?" He didn't answer. He couldn't look at me. He looked at the tablecloth, at his hands, anywhere but at the evidence of his betrayal. My mother stopped eating. She didn't panic. She didn't gasp. She simply put her fork down, wiped the corner of her mouth, and looked at me with a chilling calmness. She looked at the document as if it were a minor etiquette breach, like using the wrong fork for the salad. "You were not supposed to see that." "Avery," she said, her voice steady, "it was not left out for you. It is a draft. It is internal." "Internal?" I repeated, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "I am the operations manager. Mom, I am the one who runs the floor." When exactly was the right time to tell me that my role was being deleted? When the security guard escorted me out? "It is not deleted," my mother said, sighing as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You are being dramatic. It is a transition. We have to look at the long-term viability of the company." I turned to the next page in the folder, the timeline. I pointed to the entry for August 31st. "Support role, phase out." I read aloud. "Is that the long-term viability? Me being erased?" Reagan scoffed. She picked up her water glass, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on. Avery, it is just corporate speak. Phase out just means changing your daily tasks. You are making it sound like a conspiracy. It is just structure. You will still have a job. You will just report to me. It is streamlined." I turned my head slowly to look at my sister, the girl who had never stayed past 5 o'clock in her life, the girl who thought a supply chain was a necklace. "Structure," I repeated. "Structure is what holds a building up. Reagan, this isn't structure. This is theft. This structure gives you the power, the title, and the money, and it gives me silence. It gives me a corner office with no authority and a slow fade into irrelevance." I looked back at my father. "You let me work for 10 years. Dad, you let me fix the machines. You let me save the contracts. And all the while, you were drawing up papers to hand it all to her because she looks better in a photo?" My father opened his mouth, but my mother cut him off. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. There was no warmth in them. There was only the cold, hard calculation of a woman who had decided what the narrative was going to be. "Let us be honest for once. Avery," she said. "Honest? I asked. That would be a nice change. You are a hard worker, she said. We have never denied that. You are reliable. You are durable. But look at you. She gestured vaguely at my outfit, my hands, my posture. You are technical. Avery, you like the grease. You like the noise. You are comfortable in the back room fixing the mess. But you are not a CEO. You don't have the polish. You don't have the vision. She paused, and then she delivered the line that she had probably been rehearsing in her head for years to justify what they were doing to me. Reagan is the face, she said. You are the hands. And in this world, Avery, the head decides what the hands do. You are a person who uses your hands, not your head. That is your role. And you should be grateful we found a place for you at all. The room went dead silent. The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. It wasn't just a rejection of my career. It was a rejection of my intellect, my worth, and my very soul. She had looked at everything I had built. The complex logistics, the engineering solutions, the saving of their fortune, and reduced it to manual labor. I looked at my hands. They were steady. They were the hands that had signed the safety certs. They were the hands that had rewritten the code for the inventory system. I looked up at her, and I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. The hands. I whispered. I reached into the folder for the last time. I felt the paper of the liability agreement under my fingertips. The one document they had forgotten to mention, the one that proved that while they wanted my hands to do the work, they had legally bound my neck to the noose. I pulled it out. If I am just the hands, I said, sliding the liability clause across the table toward my father, then why is it my signature that guarantees the safety of every single product you sell? The document I had slid across the table sat there like a landmine between the roast potatoes and the crystal water glasses, the liability agreement, the piece of paper that proved my father did not just view me as an employee to be fired, but as a fall guy to be used. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My father stared at his own signature on the bottom of the page. A signature from 3 years ago that bound my professional life to his financial gain. Then, the vibration of a cell phone shattered the silence. It was not a text message, ping. It was the sustained, angry buzz of an incoming call, followed immediately by a priority notification sound that I knew well. It was the specific ringtone my father had assigned to key accounts. He looked at the screen of his phone, which was lying face up next to his untouched scotch. The color that had drained from his face earlier did not return. Instead, he turned a shade of gray that reminded me of wet concrete. "It is Halston," he whispered. He didn't pick it up. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, almost immediately, the phone buzzed again with a text message. He tapped the screen with a shaking finger. Reagan leaned over, picking up her fork again as if the interruption were merely a nuisance. "God, they are so needy," she said, rolling her eyes. "It is 7:30 at night. Don't they respect work-life balance? Just ignore it. Dad, they are trying to scare us. It is a classic negotiation tactic. I read about it in that leadership blog last week. If you answer now, you look desperate." My father's head snapped up. The motion was so violent that his neck cracked audible. "Negotiation tactic?" he shouted. His voice was not the controlled baritone he used in board meetings. It was high, ragged, and terrified. He shoved the phone toward her. "Read it. Reagan, read what your negotiation tactic just cost us." Reagan recoiled, looking at him as if he had grown a second head. She looked down at the screen. Her lips moved slightly as she read the text. "Per our previous conversation regarding the site audit failure and lack of technical leadership, we are initiating a pause on all open purchase orders effective immediately. Unless we receive confirmation of competent project oversight by 8 a.m. tomorrow, we will exercise the cancellation clause on the master agreement." Reagan blinked. "Well," she said, her voice wavering, but still defiant. "They are bluffing. They can't just pause orders. We have a contract. They need our parts. Who else is going to supply them on this timeline? They are not bluffing, my father roared, slamming his hand on the table again. Halston Dynamics does not bluff. They have 3 backup suppliers in Mexico who have been begging for this contract for 5 years. They don't need us. Reagan, we need them. That contract covers the mortgage on this house, the lease on your car, and the salary you draw for posting pictures on Instagram. The room fell silent again. This was the first time, the absolute first time in my life, that I had seen Gordon Alexander yell at his golden child. He had yelled at me 1,000 times, for being late, for being messy, for not working hard enough. But Reagan? Reagan was the princess. I watched them, feeling a strange detachment. It was like watching a play where the actors had forgotten their lines. My mother, Marianne, cleared her throat. She placed a calming hand on my father's arm, but her eyes were fixed on me. They were hard, predatory eyes. "Avery," she said, her voice dropping to that low, disappointed register she used to control us. "Look what you are doing." I looked at her, genuinely confused by her mental gymnastics. "Me?" "Yes, you," she hissed. "You are enjoying this. You are sitting there with that smug look on your face while your father falls apart. This is your family. Avery, these are the people who raised you, and you are letting a client destroy us just to prove a point? I am not the one who signed the transition plan." "Mom," I said calmly. "Stop hiding behind that piece of paper," she snapped. "This isn't about paper. This is about character. You are being selfish. You are choosing your ego over your blood. You think you are indispensable? You think you are the only one who can run a factory? You are arrogant, Avery, and you are greedy. You want us to beg you. Is that it? You want your father to beg?" She was good. I had to give her that. For 30 years, she had known exactly where to push to make me feel small. She knew that my greatest weakness was my desire to be good, to be helpful, to be the dutiful daughter. She was betting everything on the hope that the old Avery, the doormat Avery, was still in there somewhere. But she was wrong. That Avery had died in the filing room. "I am not choosing ego," I said, my voice steady. "And I am certainly not choosing money, considering I have worked for free for half my adult life." I pointed at the phone, which was now silent but glowing with the threat of financial ruin. "You think Halston is calling because of my ego?" I asked. "You think a billion-dollar defense contractor cares about our family drama?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with my mother. The relationship they have is with me, Mom, not with the brand Ridgeway, not with the New Era image, not with Reagan's Instagram feed. It is with me. It is with the person who answers the phone at 3 a.m. when a shipment is stuck in customs. It is with the person who knows the difference between a fracture and a fatigue crack. They don't care about your story. They care about my competence. Reagan made a noise of disgust. "You are so full of yourself. You are just a technician. Avery, you are not the vision." I turned to Reagan. "The vision is currently causing a stock market panic for our client." "Reagan, how is that for branding?" My father put his head in his hands. "We are going to lose it all." He moaned. "The line of credit is tied to the Halston receivables. If they cancel, the bank calls the loan on Monday. We are insolvent by Friday." He looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears of pure terror. "Avery, please, I am asking you, not as a boss, but as your father, call them. Fix it. Tell them you are in charge of the project. Tell them whatever they want to hear. Just save the contract." The plea hung in the air. It was heavy. It was painful. It would have been so easy to say yes. It would have been so easy to pick up the phone, make the call, and be the hero. They would hug me. They would toast me. Everything would go back to normal. And that was the trap. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike and then taught me to be a servant. "I have a question." "Dad," I said. He nodded eagerly. "Anything. Ask anything. Let us say I make the call," I said slowly. "Let us say I smooth it over. I tell them I am the lead. I get them to sign the renewal. The company is saved. The money keeps flowing." I paused, letting the scenario settle. Then what? He blinked. What do you mean? I mean, what happens on Tuesday? I asked. Once the crisis is over, once the ink is dry, do I go back to the transition plan? Do I go back to being the support role who is phased out in August? Do I go back to training Reagan to take my job? He opened his mouth, but the words stuck. He looked at Mom. He looked at Reagan. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say no. Avery, we will make you a partner, because that wasn't the plan. The plan was always for me to be the bridge, and for Reagan to be the destination. We will review the structure, he stammered, using the same evasive language he had used for years. We can discuss a more permanent role for you. Maybe a vice president title. We will see how it goes. We will see. I repeated. Not, yes. Not, you are a partner. Just, we will see. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. You can't even lie to me properly anymore. Dad, you want me to save the house so you can kick me out of it comfortably. I picked up the liability document from the table, but there is something you are forgetting. I said, something even more important than the Halston contract. I held up the paper. I did a little digging into the digital infrastructure today. I said, you know, the boring technical stuff that Reagan thinks is beneath her. Reagan narrowed her eyes. What are you talking about? I am talking about the enterprise resource planning system. I said, the digital brain of the company, the thing that issues the checks, releases the shipments, and certifies the safety inspections. I looked at Reagan. You have the CEO title, Reagan, but do you have the admin password? She scoffed. I have an account. IT set it up last week. You have a user account. I corrected. You can read emails. You can look at the calendar. But you cannot authorize a release. I turned the paper around so they could read the fine print. Every single safety certification for the last 5 years is digitally signed with my encrypted key. My ID, Alexander. It is hard-coded into the workflow. The insurance company mandated it. Remember, Dad? You signed the directive because you didn't want to deal with the biannual audits. You made me the sole authorized signatory for technical compliance. My father's face went from gray to white. So? Reagan asked, looking confused. We will just change the password. I shook my head. You can't just change the password. Reagan, it is a legal identity. It is tied to my engineering license. If you ship a product without that digital signature, it is automatically non-compliant. The system won't even print the shipping label. It will lock you out. I leaned back in my chair. And here's the best part. If you fire me, or if I resign, that digital key is revoked. The system freezes. You cannot ship a single screw. You cannot pay a single vendor. And you cannot certify a single safety check until you set up a new guarantor. I looked at my father. And setting up a new guarantor takes 6 weeks of background checks and insurance validation. My father looked like he was having a heart attack. 6 weeks? He whispered. We don't have 6 weeks, Reagan shrieked, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. We have orders going out tomorrow. The medical batch. The aerospace parts. Exactly. I said, and all of them are waiting for the digital signature of the person you are phasing out. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They hadn't just tried to fire me. They had tried to fire the key to the engine. They had built a car that only I could drive, and then they had tried to throw me out of it while it was moving at 100 miles per hour. Reagan turned to Dad, panic rising in her voice. Dad, you told me I was in charge. You told me Avery was just support. Why is her name on everything? Why can't I sign it? Because you are not certified, Dad yelled at her, snapping completely. Because you have a degree in communications, not mechanical engineering. You can't sign a safety cert because if the part breaks, you go to prison. Avery is the only one with the license. He stopped, breathing hard, realizing what he had just admitted. He had just admitted that my value was not support. My value was the only thing keeping them out of jail. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. So here's the situation, I said, looking down at them. Halston is walking away. The factory system is about to lock down because I am formally removing my digital authorization tonight. And you have, I checked my watch, about 12 hours before the morning shift starts, and realizes they can't print a single work order. Avery. Wait, my mother cried out, standing up. You can't do this. You can't just turn it off. That is sabotage. It is not sabotage. Mom, I said, it is resignation. I am resigning. And when an employee resigns, their access is terminated. That is standard security protocol. You wouldn't want a disgruntled ex-employee wandering around your system, would you? I picked up my purse. The phone on the table dinged again. Another email. My father looked at it. He didn't even have to pick it up. The preview was visible on the screen. Subject: Notice of contract termination. From Halston Dynamics Legal. Body: Due to failure to provide adequate assurance of operational continuity. He dropped his head onto the table. It made a dull, heavy thud. They did it. He whispered into the tablecloth. They canceled. It is over. Reagan stared at the phone. But we can fix it, right? Avery, you can call them? You can tell them it was a mistake? I looked at my sister. For the first time, I didn't see the arrogant rival. I saw a frightened child who had been promised a toy she didn't know how to operate. I said, I could call David at Halston right now. I have his personal cell number. He trusts me. If I tell him I am handling it, he will tear up that termination letter. Hope flared in my father's eyes. He lifted his head. Call him. Avery, please, anything. I will give you the VP title. I will give you a raise. Just make the call. I shook my head. No, Dad, not for a title, not for a raise, and definitely not for a promise you will break next week. I walked to the door. If you want me to save this company, I need a contract, a real one, drafted by my lawyer, with equity, with control, and with a clause that says, if you ever try to phase me out again, I take 51% of the stock. You are blackmailing us. My mother spat, her eyes full of venom. I smiled. No, Mom, I am negotiating. Finally, I opened the front door. My lawyer will send over the term sheet in the morning. If you sign it by noon, I will call Halston. If not, well, I hear the job market for communications majors is very competitive right now. I walked out into the night. I didn't look back at the house. I got into my car, turned on the engine, and drove away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving toward a disaster I had to fix. I was driving toward a future I was going to own. The sun hitting my kitchen table at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday morning felt like a foreign substance. For 10 years, my Wednesdays at 9 o'clock were spent in the windowless conference room, listening to the production manager complain about supply shortages while I frantically texted vendors under the table to fix problems I hadn't caused. Today, there was just steam rising from my coffee cup and the white cursor blinking on my laptop screen. I was not at the factory. I was not wearing my steel-toed boots. I was wearing silk pajamas, and I was conducting an audit of my own life. I had opened a new spreadsheet. At the top, I typed a single header: scope of work, uncompensated labor. I began to type. I didn't type out of anger. I typed with the cold, forensic precision of a coroner determining the cause of death. Item 1. Technical liaison for Halston Dynamics. Estimated hours per week, 15. Market rate for technical account manager, $150 per hour. Item 2. Safety Compliance Officer and IS. 9001 Auditor. Estimated hours per week, 10. Market rate, $200 per hour. Item 3. After hours. Logistics Coordinator. Estimated hours per week, 8. Market rate, $120 per hour. I kept typing. The list scrolled down the screen. Employee conflict resolution, ERP system maintenance, vendor contract renegotiation, hazardous material disposal certification. By the time I finished, the list was 4 pages long. I summed up the hours. I applied a conservative industry standard rate to each role. The total annual value of the work I had been doing for a family salary of $60,000 came out to nearly $350,000. They hadn't just been underpaying me, They had been robbing me. My phone, which I had placed face down on the granite counter, began to buzz. It had been buzzing since 7:30. I didn't pick it up. I watched it vibrate against the stone, moving slightly with the force of the panic on the other end. Missed call. Dad, 4. Missed call. Reagan, 6. Missed call. Mom, 3. Then came the voicemails. I could see the transcription preview on the screen without unlocking the phone. Dad, Avery, pick up. The system is asking for a legacy password to print the shipping labels. The trucks are waiting. We are paying detention fees. Call me back. Reagan. Hey. So, funny thing, the supplier portal is locked. It says user revoked. What is the admin code? I need to order the cardboard. Just text it to me. Mom, this is childish. Avery, we need to talk. Your father is hyperventilating. Pick up the phone. I took a sip of my coffee. It was excellent coffee. I finally had time to grind the beans properly. I opened my email client. I didn't open the Ridgeway Company inbox. I knew that would be a disaster zone of red flags and exclamation points. I opened my personal Gmail. I composed a new message. To Gordon Alexander, CEO, Marianne Alexander, Strategy Director, Reagan Alexander, Incoming CEO. Subject: Notice of cessation of voluntary services and terms for re-engagement. I took a breath. This was the point of no return. Dear Gordon, Marianne, and Reagan, effective immediately, I have ceased all voluntary, non-contractual labor on behalf of Ridgeway Industrial Works. As my formal employment status has been designated as support role phase out per the transition plan dated January 26th, I am adhering strictly to the boundaries of that description. Support staff do not possess the authority to authorize technical shipments, sign safety certifications, or negotiate with Tier 1 clients. Furthermore, I have revoked the use of my personal engineering license and digital signature from the company's ERP system to protect myself from personal liability, as outlined in the guarantor documents I previously signed. If you require my services to restore operational capacity, negotiate with Halston Dynamics, or unlock the procurement system, I am willing to return as an independent consultant under the following terms. 1. A retrospective consulting contract acknowledging my role as Chief Operations Officer. 2. A distinct separation of personal legal liability from my name. 3. An equity stake of 30% in the company, non-dilutable. 4. A written public retraction of the phase-out plan. Please direct all future correspondence regarding these terms to my legal counsel. Sarah Jenkins, I will not be accepting personal calls. Regards, Avery Alexander. I hit send. The feeling was not triumph. It was relief. It was the feeling of dropping a heavy pack after hiking up a mountain for a decade. 3 minutes later, my phone lit up with an email notification. It was from my mother. I opened it against my better judgment. Avery, I am reading this with tears in my eyes. How could you? You are tearing this family apart over money. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a job when you came out of college. And now, when we are facing a crisis, you send us a legal threat? You are holding your sister's future hostage. You are abandoning your father when his heart is weak. This is not how we raised you. If you have a shred of decency, you will come in here and fix this before the neighbors find out. Do not make us the villains in your little drama. I read it twice. The old Avery would have crumbled. The old Avery would have read, tears in my eyes, and felt a spike of guilt so sharp it would have pierced her resolve. I would have thought, maybe I am being too harsh. Maybe I am the bad guy. But the new Avery just looked at the timestamp. She had replied in 3 minutes. That wasn't heartbreak. That was panic control. She didn't address the equity. She didn't address the liability. She just attacked my character because that was the only weapon she had left. I didn't reply. I hit forward, typed in my lawyer's email address, and added a brief note. Please file this under attempted emotional coercion, and do not reply. I closed the laptop. By noon. The silence in my apartment was in stark contrast to the meltdown I knew was occurring 5 miles away. I didn't need to be there to see it. I knew the rhythm of the factory so well I could visualize the collapse. By now, the morning shipments for the automotive clients would be staged on the dock. The forklift drivers would be trying to scan the pallets. The handheld scanners would beep 3 times, a low, dissonant tone that meant error. The system would demand a supervisor override code. Miller would go to the terminal. He would type in his code. Access denied. He would call the office. Reagan would try to log in, but Reagan didn't have an override code. She had a view-only profile. The trucks would be idling in the yard. Drivers get paid by the mile, not by the hour. After 45 minutes of waiting, they would start pulling away. That was thousands of dollars in dead freight fees accruing every hour. Then the suppliers would start calling. The automated purchase orders for next week's raw materials usually went out at 11 o'clock. Without my digital signature, the batch process would fail. The steel foundry wouldn't load the truck. The plastic molders wouldn't heat the resin. The supply chain is a living thing. If you cut the blood flow to the brain, the extremities die instantly. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a text message. It wasn't from family. It was from Miller, the floor foreman. Hey, Avery, I know something is going on. The suits are running around like headless chickens. Reagan is crying in your old office. Your dad is screaming at IT. The system is locked down tight. Just wanted to say, we miss you. The guys are asking where you are. Nobody knows what to do with the yellow tags. Hope you are okay. I stared at the screen. A lump formed in my throat. These were the people I was hurting. Miller, who had 2 kids in college. Benny, who was retiring next year. I typed back, I am okay. Miller, I am sorry about the mess. Tell the guys to document every hour they stand idle. Make sure you get paid. Do not let them clock you out. He replied instantly, Roger that. Give 'em hell. Avery, we know who runs this place. That text gave me more strength than 1,000 legal contracts. At 2 o'clock, I left the apartment. I put on a tailored blazer, not for a meeting with my father, but for a meeting with my future. I drove to a coffee shop in the financial district, a place with dark wood paneling and the smell of expensive espresso. It was neutral ground. Sitting at a corner table was Sloan Mercer. Sloan was a legend in the regional manufacturing circuit. She was the chief operating officer of Mercer Logistics, a company 10 times the size of Ridgway. We had worked together on a joint venture 3 years ago, a complex integration of shipping protocols. She had been terrifyingly efficient, and she had treated me with a respect I wasn't used to. When I walked in, she stood up. She didn't offer a handshake. She offered a nod of recognition. Avery, she said, you look rested. I feel different, I admitted, sitting down. She ordered a black coffee for herself and an herbal tea for me without asking. She remembered. So, she said, leaning back in her chair, the grapevine is on fire. I heard a rumor that Ridgway missed a Halston delivery window this morning, and that Gordon Alexander was seen shouting at a FedEx driver in the parking lot. I took a sip of tea. I can neither confirm nor deny the shouting, but the delivery window was definitely missed. Sloan smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. But it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the situation. You finally pulled the pin, didn't you? She asked. I looked at her. I didn't pull the pin. Sloan, I just stopped holding it in place for them. She nodded slowly. I have been wondering when you would do it. I watched you on that integration project. You ran circles around your father's entire executive team. I remember asking you why you didn't have a VP title on your card, and you mumbled something about family dynamics. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table. Let me be blunt. Avery, I don't care about your family drama. I don't care about Ridgway. To be honest, I think that company is a dinosaur that is about to go extinct. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a thick contract. It was a term sheet. But I care about talent. And I have a problem. My director of operations is retiring in 3 months. I need someone who understands legacy systems but thinks like a futurist. I need someone who can walk onto a floor and know a machine is overheating just by the sound. She slid the paper across the table. I am not offering you a support role, Avery. I am offering you the director seat, full autonomy, a budget that would make your father weep, and a salary that reflects the fact that you are the one keeping the planes in the air. I looked down at the paper. The number at the bottom was double what I had calculated on my spreadsheet that morning. There is no phase-out clause. Sloan said softly, "If you take this, you are not building someone else's legacy. You are building your own." I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. It was surreal. For 10 years, I had begged for scraps of validation from my parents. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be enough for them. And here, in a coffee shop on a Wednesday afternoon, a stranger was handing me the keys to the kingdom simply because she had seen me work. "I don't need an answer today," Sloan said. "I know you have entanglements to resolve, but the offer stands for 30 days. She stood up. "One piece of advice. Avery? From one woman in this industry to another?" "Yes." "Don't go back to Ridgeway, even if they meet your terms, even if they beg. Because once you show them you are stronger than them, they will never forgive you. They will take your help, and then they will spend the rest of their lives trying to punish you for making them need it." She walked away, leaving the term sheet on the table. I sat there for a long time, looking at the number, looking at the title. Director of Operations. My phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail from my father. I picked it up and held it to my ear. "Avery, it is Dad. Listen, we can talk about the equity. Just come in. Halston is sending a legal team at 4 o'clock. I don't know what to say to them. I don't have the files. Please, I am begging you." His voice broke at the end. It was the sound of a man who was drowning. I looked at Sloane's offer, then I looked at the phone. Sloane was right. If I went back, even with a contract, it would be a war. Every day would be a battle to enforce my rights. Every decision would be second-guessed by a mother who resented my power and a sister who envied my competence. But there was one thing left to do, one loose end. I couldn't just walk away and let Halston destroy the factory, not because of my father, but because of Miller, because of the guys on the floor. Because if Ridgeway went under, 200 people would lose their jobs. I wasn't going to go back to work for my father, but I was going to finish this. I was going to dictate the terms of the surrender. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Sarah." I said when she answered, "Draft the contract, but add a new clause." "What is it?" Sarah asked. "I want a consulting agreement. Short term, 30 days. Specifically to transition the Halston account and stabilize the system." "Okay," Sarah said. "And the fee?" "Triple my hourly rate." I said, "Payable in advance. And one more thing." "Yes?" "I want a seat at the table for the Halston meeting today. Not as an employee, as an external consultant. I want to be the one who tells them what is happening." "Avery," Sarah warned, "that is risky. If you walk in there, they might try to pull you back in." "Let them try," I said, looking at the term sheet from Mercer Logistics. "I am not afraid of them anymore. Sarah, I just want to make sure that when I leave for good, everyone in that room knows exactly who they lost." The conference room at Ridgeway Industrial Works had glass walls, designed to make the operations look transparent. But as I walked toward it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the glass only served to display the desperation of the people inside. The scene was staged like a bad play. My sister, Reagan, was sitting at the head of the table, the seat my father had occupied for 30 years. She was wearing a new suit, stiff and immaculate, her posture rigid. My mother, Marianne, sat to her right, her hands clasped on the table in a pose of forced serenity, though I could see the tension in her jaw from 20 feet away. My father, Gordon, sat on the left, looking diminished. He was not the lion of the industry today. He was a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. Across from them sat the executioners, David Thorne, the VP of Operations for Halston Dynamics, and his legal counsel, a woman named Elena, whom I had met once during a compliance audit. They were not looking at Reagan. They were looking at their watches. I did not rush. I adjusted the strap of my bag, checked the time on my phone, and pushed the heavy glass door open. The conversation inside stopped instantly. David turned, his expression, which had been tight with annoyance, softened just a fraction. "Avery," he said, standing up and extending a hand. "We were about to call it." I shook his hand firmly. "I apologize for the delay." "David, I was reviewing the terms of engagement with my own counsel to ensure we didn't waste your time today." I did not look at my family. I did not ask for permission to sit. I pulled out a chair at the center of the table, placing myself exactly between the opposing sides. I was not part of the Ridgway defense team. I was a third party. Reagan cleared her throat. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and resentment. "Glad you could join us." "Avery," she said, trying to sound authoritative, "I was just explaining to David that the miscommunication regarding the shipment was a glitch in our new software migration." "It was not a glitch," David said, cutting her off without even looking at her. He kept his eyes on me. "It was a failure of protocol. The batch lacked the requisite safety certification. The system rejected it because the digital signature did not match the authorized engineer on file." He paused, glancing at a folder in front of him. "And since we are being transparent, our system flagged that the authorized engineer, you, Avery, had not logged in for 72 hours. My father made a small, strangled noise in his throat. Reagan jumped in, her voice rising in pitch. "That is what I meant. We are transitioning the authorization protocols to my office. It just takes time to update the system." David finally looked at her. It was a look of profound pity. "Ms. Alexander," he said slowly, "you cannot simply update a safety protocol. It requires a licensed professional engineer with 10,000 hours of documented experience in metallurgy to underwrite that risk. Do you have an engineering license?" Reagan opened her mouth, then closed it. "No, but I manage the team that—" "Then you cannot sign," David said, closing the subject. He turned back to me. "So, Avery, here is the situation. We are holding a contract worth $2 million. We have a shipment of medical-grade components sitting on your dock that are currently useless because nobody in this building seems willing or able to certify them." He leaned forward. "I need to know who is running this factory, not who owns it, not who is on the website. Who is responsible?" The room went silent. My mother stared at me, her eyes pleading for me to lie, to say, "We are a team," to cover for them one last time. My father looked down at his hands. I opened my black folder. I took out a single sheet of paper, the list of projects I had personally managed over the last 5 years. "I am responsible for the technical integrity of the product." "David," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I always have been. Every yield rate, every tolerance check, and every crisis management protocol came from my desk." I slid the paper toward him. "However," I continued, my voice hardening, "I am currently not employed in a capacity that allows me to exercise that responsibility." "What?" David asked, frowning. I pulled out the transition plan, the one my family had tried to hide. I placed it next to his hand. As of January 26th, the executive leadership of Ridgway designated my role as support staff, with a directive to phase out by August 31st. I heard my mother gasp, "Avery." I ignored her. Under this new structure, I explained to David, I was stripped of executive authority. Therefore, when the crisis hit yesterday, I was contractually unable to intervene. I could not override the system because the new leadership removed my standing to do so. David picked up the document. He read the words, "phase out." He read the timeline. He looked at the signature of my father at the bottom. He looked up at Gordon. "You phased her out?" David asked, his voice incredulous. "You took the only person in this building who knows how our product works, and you put her in a support role?" My father stammered. It was a long-term succession strategy. We wanted to bring fresh energy." "Fresh energy," David repeated, shaking his head. "You nearly bankrupted your supply chain for fresh energy." He tossed the paper back on the table. "Well, that clarifies things." He looked at Elena. His lawyer. "Cancel the contract." "Wait," Reagan screamed, standing up. "You can't. We have Avery here. She is here to fix it. She can sign the certs right now. David looked at Reagan. Why would she? He asked. You fired her, or you are in the process of firing her. Why would she sign a legal document guaranteeing a product for a company that doesn't value her? Because she is family, my mother shouted, losing her composure entirely, because this is her legacy too. I stood up. Actually, I said, playing my final card. It is not about legacy, it is about liability. I reached into my folder for the last time. I pulled out the liability agreement. I showed it to David. He was a professional. He recognized the form immediately. David, I said, as you know, this is a personal guarantor form. It binds my personal assets and my professional license to the quality of Ridgway's output. I turned to look at my father. My family wants me to sign off on these shipments to save the contract, but they also want to remove me from leadership. They want my signature on the risk. But Reagan's name on the check. I looked back at David. I cannot, in good conscience or legal prudence, accept that arrangement. As of this morning, I have formally petitioned to remove my name from the insurance registry. I will not be the safety net for a trapeze act I am not allowed to perform. Reagan slumped back into her chair. She looked defeated. She finally understood. She couldn't have the glory without the risk, and she was terrified of the risk. So, I said, closing my folder, unless Ridgway can produce another licensed engineer with 10 years of experience by 5 o'clock today, you are correct to cancel the contract. The room was silent for a long 10 seconds. My father looked like a broken man. My mother looked at me with pure hatred. The mask of the loving matriarch finally gone. Then David spoke. He didn't speak to them. He spoke to me. Avery. He said, I don't care about Ridgway's internal politics, but I do care about my parts. I have an assembly line in Detroit waiting for those components. He pulled a document from his own briefcase. We have a provision in our vendor charter. It allows us to appoint an external project guardian in cases of supplier incompetence. He slid the document toward me. We want to hire you, Avery, not as a Ridgway employee, as a Halston Dynamics independent consultant. We want you to oversee this production run. You will report directly to me. We will pay you your standard consulting rate, direct to your LLC. You will have absolute authority over the production line for the duration of this contract. He looked at my father. And Ridgway will grant her full access and indemnify her against all liability. If you refuse, we walk, and we sue you for breach of performance. My father looked at the document. He looked at me. He realized that he wasn't hiring his daughter back. He was hiring a boss. We accept, he whispered. Reagan looked up. But what about me? What about the CEO transition? David stood up, buttoning his jacket. Ms. Alexander, you can call yourself whatever you like. You can print it on a business card. You can put it on Instagram. But when it comes to the work, you answer to Avery. He turned to me. Can you have the shipment cleared by 6 o'clock? I looked at the paperwork. I looked at the consulting agreement I had prepared with Sarah, which mirrored David's offer almost perfectly. I picked up a pen. I can have it cleared by 5:30, I said. I signed the Halston agreement. Then I slid the Ridgway indemnification form toward my father. Sign it, Dad, I said softly. He signed it. His hand shook. I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel the rush of revenge I thought I would feel. I just felt clean. I walked over to the door. I will go down to the floor and unlock the system. I said to the room, Reagan, stay here and finish the paperwork with Elena. Mom, you might want to call the PR firm and explain why the new era is on hold. I walked out of the glass room. As I walked down the hallway toward the factory floor, the sound of the machines grew louder. It was a rhythmic, pounding beat. I walked onto the floor. Miller was there, standing by the idle conveyor belt. When he saw me, he straightened up. He saw the badge David had given me, a Halston consultant badge. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. He turned to the crew. All right, boys, he shouted. We are back online. The guys cheered. It wasn't a polite golf clap. It was a roar. I walked to the main terminal. I typed in my password, but this time, I wasn't logging in as Avery the daughter or Avery the support staff. I was logging in as Avery Alexander, independent contractor. I authorized the shipment, the printer whirred to life, spitting out the shipping labels. The forklift engines revved. The factory came back to life. I watched it for a moment. I watched the empire my family had built. And I realized I didn't need to own it to control it. I didn't need their name to have power. I turned around and walked toward the exit. My work was done. I had a dinner reservation with Sloan Mercer at 8 o'clock to discuss my new role as director of operations at her firm. I would consult for Ridgway for 30 days, take their money, save their contract, and then I would walk away for good. I stepped out into the evening sun. The air was cool. I checked my phone. There was a text from my mother. "You humiliated us." I deleted it without reading the rest. I hadn't humiliated them. I had just turned on the lights, and if they didn't like what they saw in the mirror, that wasn't my problem anymore. I got into my car. I put the consulting contract in the passenger seat. I started the engine. For the first time in my life, the road ahead wasn't a circle leading back to my father's house. It was a straight line, leading somewhere I had never been. It was leading to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed Avery's journey from being phased out to taking total control. It is always satisfying to see competence win over image. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of New York, the sunny coast of California, or maybe somewhere across the ocean? Please comment below and let me know. I love reading through your comments and seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories about karma, justice, and rising above, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Monica Revenge Stories. Don't forget to hit the like button on this video, and if you really loved it, please smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep bringing you these stories. See you in the next video.